get into that later because there's a couple of reasons I want to discuss. First of all, what the fuck is a taser whip? How does a taser whip work in the first place? Well, luckily for us, I have a wonderful example here. Now, allow me to put on plastic glove. I've been tased by this accidentally before, and I don't want that to happen again. It was awful. Alright. So, taser whip. Taser whip. Look at this shit. Now, this particular taser whip, so we can have this argument properly, works along the entire cord. A lot of taser whips only work at the very end of the cord because that's where it connects, kind of like the beginning of a taser is just an extended taser on a rope. This taser, however, has, as you can see, 2 cords, and even if you aren't touching the edges, which actually I think are pretty cool because they have little X-Acto blades, since it has 2 cords, if you aren't touching the tip, where it usually shocks, if you're touching here, it'll still shock. I don't know if you can see that from there. Yeah, there you go. And you know, that's really important for this argument because that means you don't really have to be precise with your swing. You don't have to hit them with this end. You could just swing wildly and any length of the taser that hits it is gonna get fucked up, right? So that's how this particular taser works. Also to mention, just in case, this taser only activates when you push this trigger. So that might be a factor for later. I'm not sure. This is the first reason why I think it wouldn't work. Because a taser, unlike every single other weapon that exists on this planet, only has temporary effects. Let me give you an example. If you get punched in the face, even after that punch has left your face, you're still gonna feel pain. Just like if you get pepper sprayed in your face, it's still gonna fuck you up for like an hour, you know, like 30 minutes. I don't know how pepper spray works, but I'm assuming that shit stays on for a long time. You know what I mean? That shit burns. And I think every weapon functions with the same purpose. You know, you're trying to inflict damage on something by releasing a certain amount of energy. But this energy usually leaves long-lasting pain. The difference with the taser is electricity doesn't really work like that. Unless you get like a stupid dose, a dose that would never be able to be in this type of taser, that would actually be lethal or could like damage you by like burning or like, you know, creating all this crazy shit inside of you. Tasers don't have that type of power. So if you're getting tased, it's gonna hurt like a bitch. But when you stop getting tased, the effects are almost immediately gone. Which means that tasers are really effective at causing pain on an opponent temporarily, but not in the long term. And why I think this is important is because when you're swinging a whip, right, in the action of whipping, like if you're trying to get someone, for only an instant will your taser actually touch your opponent. Like it's not gonna get stuck there. You know, it's gonna be really hard for that to happen. You would need a much stiffer tool to actually stick it into someone. And that's why tasers don't really have a whip, because they're very effective on their own by just like a motherfucker. If you're hitting someone for only a moment, even though you will be causing a great amount of pain, the second your whip leaves their organism, they're gonna be relatively okay and they're gonna be able to counter you. Which means it's almost literally impossible to beat anyone because none of your attacks have a long-lasting effect, especially because they're only glancing at your opponent. They're not really getting stuck. Whips, like unless they're really long and like feathery whips, they're not really gonna wrap around something and stay there. Like a big whip, it might wrap around, but like you'll be able to take it off in a second. Like it's not gonna be that hard to wrap. And I'm sure there are exceptions to this, but for this particular whip, this isn't gonna wrap around you and get stuck. So it's gonna be really hard to actually maintain pain on a person. So that's one thing. I just noticed that the video behind me wasn't playing. It's actually a compilation of the best whipping of 2020 for your enjoyment. Factor number 2 for me is that whips throughout history haven't really been that used for combat. They've been used to inflict pain, you know, like to keep people in control, but they haven't been used for warfare, with a couple exceptions that I will mention. And I think the reason for that is it's very hard to actually use a whip in a not perfect situation. In a place where your whip can miss and someone can just grab it, or a person has any type of armor in particular, because you're not really applying that much. The damage from the whip comes from its speed, but it's so light that with any type of armor, like if you have like a leather jacket, you'll probably, like, it'll hurt, but you'll be fine, you know, you're not gonna get cut. So that's a huge inconvenience for a whip. And sure, maybe if it's super electrified, it can go through some things, but you know, I might try it. I might try putting on a leather jacket and seeing if this can go through it. I doubt it. I'm not too confident on it though, because leather, you know, I guess is conductive. We gotta do some experiments later on, but this is out of the conversation. If your opponent has armor, you're fucked, because electricity is gonna be the only factor working. If you miss, it's fucked. If you're in a large group of people, you're gonna hit everyone around you and you're gonna get fucked, because you can't have a tight formation of people, which is actually super essential if you're talking about hand-to-hand combat. Like, number one thing is having a tight group of people that can defend each other. And if you're all fucking swinging shit, it's gonna be impossible for y'all to defend each other, because you're all gonna be getting hit by your own whips, which sucks. Also, the ability to get tangled. Like, if you're trying to hit someone and you're not in a perfect environment, like if there are trees and shit around, you're fucked, because you can't stab it. I mean, you could try to do like this, but I wouldn't count on it if it was, you know, your life on the fucking line. So, yeah, I'm not too fan about whips in combat. Now, there are whip-like things in combat, though. And this isn't exactly a whip by that same definition, so this is a whip-like thing. I'll give you some examples of things that kind of function like a whip, but they're not really whips. Number one, the flail. Holy shit. The flail is essentially like the opposite of a whip with the functionality of a whip. Like, it's this weapon that functions by swinging it, and doesn't have any inherent rigidity, so it's basically a rope. But instead of being on the super light side and relying on speed, it's on the super heavy side and relies on pure mass and it wrapping around things. So flail's a very good example of a type, or a cousin of the whip, let's say. Another one, I don't know what these pictures are called. I'll edit it in. But there's this Indian like whip sword, and it's essentially the handle of a sword, and wait, no, or maybe the handle of a whip, I don't remember. But the sword is super thin and narrow, and it's floppy, and it like swings around and shit, and you could essentially use it as a sort of whip. It's like waving a sheet of aluminum foil, but it's actually long and it's actually sharp on the edges. And actually, people that have gotten really good at this can swing like, it's not crazy, like 7 or 9 at a time on one handle. And it's basically like a barrage of whip swords, which is still not the most effective melee weapon for the reasons that we have mentioned. But holy shit, that could fucking work. Like, you get hit by like a blade, you're not really relying on just the raw kinetic energy like a regular whip, you know, like you actually have an edge and you're hitting in alignment with that edge to maximize your energy. And it's in a sense a more effective whip because it's a cutting whip. It's not like an impact whip, which is interesting. Um, and I guess now we just have to wonder, what would this be then? Because this is really neither. To me, I'm sure everyone's gonna have a different opinion because, how many fucking electric whips does anyone see? This hasn't really been studied. But to me, this feels more like a regular whip. And let me tell you why. Because the quote unquote damage it's causing is all about pain. And unlike a sword whip that isn't relying on its pain to cause damage, this is. So I would consider this more like a whip. So I don't really like the idea of a whip, but now I've attached this taser to it, and I basically have a whip without the ability to cause long-lasting pain, only instant pain. But one huge benefit about this that I'm sure will work in specific scenarios more than any other weapon is just that the fact that it's electric means that even if I'm not moving it, even if it's producing no kinetic energy, if I click this button, you're gonna get fucked. So if anyone's like holding this, or like you just basically, you don't even need to swing it, you just touch it, or like you just, any contact with your opponent, imagine if you like touch your opponent's sword or whatever, and it's a metal sword, it's probably gonna be conductive. Or I don't know how electricity works, but like you get the point. You could easily get fucked up by something that doesn't have to be moved to cause you damage. Kind of like fire, fire can just be chilling in there. And like if you have a sword covered in fire, even though for obvious reasons fire isn't effective like this because humans are flammable and you need fire to be on you for a long time for it to cause damage, it's the same principle. It's fire doesn't really have to move to be fucked up. And I think that's what draws people in to taser whips. It's just that you not only have a weapon, but you have like a power source attached to this weapon that can equally cause a huge amount of pain. I'm gonna say one last thing. I think under specific circumstances, this whip can be the most effective weapon though. Maybe not the most, but it can certainly be effective under these specific conditions. The one thing that this weapon has over other weapons is it is essentially immune to grappling. Even with swords, if you grab it properly and you're aligned with the edge, you can grab an opponent's sword if they leave it there, or if you're on the ground, or their arm gets pinned, or whatever. And we know this because, first of all, it just makes sense. And second of all, because people have actually used that technique offensively. People have actually grabbed, like, let me show you. People have actually grabbed swords like this, half swording, either like this or like this, to stab at the joints in opponent's armor, the really weak spots, where you can be more precise by moving your sword like this, other than doing this. This is much more clumsy than this, you know what I mean? And this weapon is essentially immune to your opponent grabbing it. Like if you were whipping someone with a regular whip and they somehow blocked it with a shield or something and they grabbed it, you're fucked. What are you gonna do about it? It's your arm against his arm, but your opponent likely has other weapons, because you have a whip and he doesn't. And he's not gonna drop his weapon to grab yours. So if he grabs your whip, you're fucked. You can't really grab this, because the second you grab it, boom, bitch, you're fucked up. It's literally impossible. Well, unless they have plastic gloves. Can you imagine? Your opponent's immune to you because they're covered in like a plastic, like latex, like BDSM suit. Wild. But yeah, I don't think the whip would be effective overall unless your opponent is some sort of grappler where he can't hold your weapon and only you can. I don't think it would be an effective weapon. I think if it's this or just your hands, I would start by wielding this, and once my opponent got close to me, I would just, duke it out. use my fist because like this isn't gonna help me in close quarters, and it might actually fucking electrify me, which is a total factor we're gonna be discussed. But you know, I think you can always get hit by your own weapon. The problem with this is you can't get like you don't have to get hit hard. Like if you're carrying like a hammer and you do this, that's not gonna hurt you. But if you're using this and it just grazes your leg, you're still gonna get fucked up. But anyways, no, I don't think this would be more of an effect. I think this would be better than having nothing, but literally anything around you is probably going to be more effective at just bludgeoning someone or just causing any sort of damage that isn't instant and temporary. Because like you're never going to beat your opponent if you can't leave long-lasting damage. So those are my thoughts on it. Y'all let me know what you think. Yeah, and oh, this is how I made it. So the way this is all connected is like this. You see these two prongs, this one here and this one here? Well, that's actually where the taser would arc. I attached a wire to the tip of it and then insulated it so it couldn't arc with the other tip. So the electricity is directly redirected down this red wire, up this wire, and then into the main whip mechanism. And the reason why it goes back and then back again is because if this is just attached like here, falling down, all of the weight of the whip, all of that shit, even the blades, are gonna be on this. And these metal prongs are good for like receiving impacts, but not so much for pulling. This might actually fall apart if you pull on one of those for a long enough amount of time. So what I did is using zip ties, I made a tiny little harness. So all of this weight is actually falling here, not on the prongs themselves, here and here. I mean, it falls here and then sustained here. So the prongs aren't really experiencing any weight, just the tension of this top wire. First, this is a flashlight, and then the second click, it's armed. you get that little red thing that I love, and the punch just this. Also, this is the first episode of a series of episodes where TikTok is full of bitches and they don't let me post anything related to weapons, so I'm gonna do this here. I am going to be just talking about how different weapons could be used, and me myself, I've made all of these. Like I have a passion for making weapons of the homemade variety and try to make them as effective as possible. Some of them are more for goofs, some of them are actually effective. I really want to discuss the process and the effectiveness of all of these things. One last thing. I haven't showed this to anyone, but it's gonna be dope as fuck. This is a flamethrower I made. Now, I will include this in the series, but I will only, maybe I'll show it before, I'm not sure, but I would like to show it after I find a place to shoot it. The thing is, when you're shooting this amount of gasoline, I live in a city. First of all, it's illegal as fuck, second of all, where am I gonna do it? Where am I gonna record it without like causing a fire? You know what I mean? So I'll post something about this, but I don't know when I'm gonna be able to post the live firing test of my flamethrower, guys. So I'll have to get back on y'all on that, but I'm sure it will happen.